Okay, good morning. Here we are at Temple Baptist Church in the Shiloh Sunday School class, and got some big switches since we met last, and we have switched countries. We have switched prophets from Elijah to Elisha, and things are a lot different. We have jumped over into Second Kings. We also changed books. Actually, as we've mentioned before, uh, in the original text, First and Second Kings was just all one book, and later on this was divided up. And we'll not go into that a whole lot for time's sake here today. But we are in chapter 5 of Second Kings. That's the first lesson in our Explore the Bible uh, books that we use. It's the first one. It's a good lesson. Most of you all that are watching this probably have been through this in Vacation Bible School, and Lord knows how many Sunday school lessons you have heard on this same thing. And I'm probably not going to tell you anything new, but there are some things that are worth looking at in this interaction between this commander of the armies of Syria at that time. Yeah, we'll see here in this literature that we use today, for today, it is talking about, it uses the name Syria for the nation. In a lot of our literature and what we have been looking at in the past, it calls, rather than Syria, it uses the name Aram, but yet it's still Syria. The name has changed in more modern times, and so here we are with it. But verse 1 deals with this, says, Now Naaman, captain of the host of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master, and honorable, and because of him the Lord had given deliverance or some victories unto Syria militarily, it's talking about. And he was also a mighty man in valor, but he was a leper. So there's some things that we need to see. In this part of the world where they are at right now, leprosy was not a just go to a leper colony and stay there forever till you die. It was more accepted to be out in the public. Actually, and leprosy was not just because you got next to somebody or happened to be in the same vicinity that you were going to catch leprosy, because it was not that way. Now it's called Hansen's disease. But, and again, not to be running too much rabbits because of the time frame we have, I want us to see something about Naaman. Naaman, he was a good man. He was this, according to just verse 1 for what it says about him, he was a commander. It says a captain of the hosts or a captain of the armies of the king of Syria. And it says he was a great man with his master. He was highly regarded. He was a very valuable asset to the king of Syria in that. He was a capable leader, but he was honorable in that. He was honorable to everybody he met. And as you go through this lesson and you look at that, you see that in this man. He was not somebody that the king of Syria wanted to lose to a disease called leprosy. Hansen's disease is what it's called now. But it goes on and it says here that he was honorable because by him the Lord had given deliverance unto Syria. And that's kind of a strange statement to make, maybe, as we look at this. But yet, when we do look at it, we see the kind of spiritual condition Israel, the northern kingdom, was in at this time. We've studied how that God required for Israel, the northern kingdom, to and Judah, the southern kingdom for that matter, to worship Him. He was monotheistic in his he required that of the people. And their leaders, the kings, even the kings of Judah and Benjamin, the southern kingdom down there, they were edging more towards a polytheistic way of worship all the time. In other words, just this big 5-letter religious words, I guess, but pantheistic type of religion where they just worshiped whatever they wanted to, basically, is what it got into. But yet it says, because of that, it says, because of him, by his leadership militarily, the Lord had given deliverance unto Assyria. And that's what it's talking about. They would, it says, he was a mighty man in valor, but he was a leper. And the very next verse there says, and the Assyrians had gone out by companies and brought out captive out of the land of Israel a little maid. We'll get to that in a minute. But these companies, it says gone out by companies, it was talking about raiding parties, and they would go out and capture, the Israelis, though not Israelis, but the Jewish people in the northern kingdom there, and bring them back as slaves, and then sell them or use them, do whatever they wanted to do with them. But that was part of life in that day. And so anyway, it goes on that says that he was a mighty man of valor. He was a soldier, and he was a brave soldier and a leader in that. He was a leper used by God. That seems opposite of things, but yet he was, and God used him in a very big way there. But these Syrians, these Syrian army, they had gone out and they had captured this little, it says a little maid, and it just happened that she was Naaman's wife. Now, it does good to look at this young girl. It doesn't say much about her. We can assume that probably her parents were probably killed. She probably was an orphan. She had been brought up probably in the religion of the Jewish people, but yet at the same time in this polytheistic type of way of worship. But yet her, of all people, this little girl that's been carried away from home, she's been taken to a foreign land, and she's been given to the wife of the commander of the armies of Syria, and she's a servant in the household. But in all that, as we go through this lesson, we see that she is the one that has hung on to her worship of Yahweh God, and that speaks a whole lot for her, because I think about the kids that are in our schools. They sometimes, they get treated kind of rough because of their beliefs, but yet we like to think that they're strong and they stand for God, and so you just have to respect this little girl for what she's done. And it goes on there in verse 3, and she said unto her mistress, would God my Lord were with the prophet that is in Samaria, for he would recover him of his leprosy. She's exercising her faith when she has an opportunity. I don't know how much she carried with her worship of Yahweh back in that time, but she was not afraid to share the word and to share what would bring relief to her master, to her master's husband there in that. And it says, and one went in and told his Lord, saying, thus and thus saith the maid that is in the land of Israel. And the king of Syria said, Go, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel. Now this gets a little bit dicey there when he starts this, because somebody else heard this word, and they picked it up, and the word got back to the king of Syria, and he's recognizing how valuable Naaman is and how valuable Naaman has been to him in the past, and he don't want to lose him, because this at that time in the culture that we're talking about, there was but one end for this leprosy thing. It just had not got to that point yet, but it would get there if something didn't happen. So he is recognizing the value of his military leader there. He's willing to spend his resources to get this man healed if that's what it takes. Whatever it takes, he's willing to do it. And it said there, and he departed and took with him 10 talents of silver and 6,000 pieces of gold and 10 changes of raiment. That was a lot of gold and a lot of silver, and the best clothes to wear and all that. And then he says, and he brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, now when this letter is come unto thee, behold, I have therefore sent Naaman my servant to thee, that thou mayest recover him of his leprosy. This is, he's just barking up the wrong tree. He's thinking that he can buy Naaman's healing with money and with presents, and actually, as in the whole scope of this thing, they are the military power in the world at that time, and Israel, the king of Israel there, Joram, he's intimidated by this to the max, and he has reason to be. In verse 7, it talks about that. It says, it came to pass when the king of Israel had read the letter that he tore his clothes, and in other words, he's kind of afraid of what this might mean, because Joram knows that he does not have the power to heal anybody. He's just the king, and now this guy that's really the most powerful man in the world has sent all this money with the expectation that Naaman is going to be healed of this leprosy. And Joram knows there's no way. This is just not going to happen. I don't have the power or the ability, no matter how much gold or how many presents are sent, I do not have that ability. And that's to his credit, I guess, that he was rightfully worried about the situation. He goes on there in verse 7, and it came to pass when the king of Israel had read the letter that he rent his clothes and said, am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man doth send unto me to recover a man of his leprosy, or to cure a man of his leprosy? Wherefore consider, I pray thee, and see how he seeketh a quarrel against me. You know, everybody's heard this old story that, if mama ain't happy, then ain't nobody happy. Well, we can apply that right here when we see that, how that Joram tore his clothes, because in that culture of that day, that was a sign of displeasure. He was not a happy camper. And when he's not happy, then that's going to flow downhill to everybody else, and they know it. Because in verse 8 says, and it was so when Elisha, the man of God. Let's back up just a minute on this thing. A lot of people, myself included, get these two confused, Elijah and Elisha. If you look at that and you think about, the only difference is the letter J and the letter S in their names. And if you think in the alphabet that J comes first, then Elijah is always first. And of course, we have passed that now in this here, but it's a way to remember who you're talking about and not get them confused in this. But verse 8 again says, and it was so when Elisha, the man of God, had heard that the king of Israel had rent his clothes. It's one of them uh-oh minutes where he's thinking, this is not good. This is not good for anybody that he has done this. And he sent him a message. He said, wherefore hast thou tore their clothes, or rent your clothes? Let him come now. Let's see, I'm going to flip my page here. Let him come now to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. And so I'm going to flip a couple more pages here, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman came with his horse and his chariot, and he stood at the door of the house of Elijah. And Elijah sent a message unto him. Kind of get a picture of this in your mind. Naaman has came with his entourage. No doubt he's brought a lot of soldiers with him. He's probably brought a lot of people. There are people that care for them. There's a crowd there. It's not just Naaman coming by himself there. And he says, so Naaman came with his horses and his chariot and stood at the door of the house of Elijah. he is puffed up and he's proud and he's he's the man there, but yet he's, in a sense, he's coming begging for something, but yet he's still got that pride in him, and he's not yet learned to be humble before God or even God's man. And so it says Elijah sent a messenger unto him saying, there's a comma right there, so let's just stop and think about that a little bit. Elisha did not even go outside to greet this man, this maybe the second most powerful person in the world, and he's not playing to his arrogance in this. He just sent somebody out to take a note and go tell him what to do. And it says, and go wash in the Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come again to thee, and thou shalt be clean. In that, at the beginning of this leprosy stuff, it was just a white spot on his skin, and I don't know how far it had progressed. It did not say that, but he was still to the place where he could interact and mingle with people, and it was not a problem. But yet at the same time, there was the spot that wouldn't go away, and it was always there and spreading and getting worse. And so he says, go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come again to thee, and thou shalt be clean. And what we need to think about and understand in that, if we get a picture in our mind of where we live here in southeast Missouri, we think about Current River over here, and it's clean and pretty and clear, and we think about, it wouldn't bother you to go jump into that for a swim or whatnot, but by the same token, go down over here below the dam at Lake Wapapella into the St. Francis River, and right now it's just a muddy, nasty looking mess, and it's real low, and the water would be hot, and this is the difference that they are talking about here in Naaman's mind, because there's 2 rivers there that I've kind of lost where they're at there, but there's 2 rivers there in Syria that are just like that. One there is called lost the place there, the Golden Stream, and in that it was a clean, clear, pure river. And Naaman he's mad. He's saying, you want me to go jump in the muddy St. Francis River rather than go over here in Current River? That's bringing it up to date where we live, but that's what he was doing. I mean, in essence, that's what he was saying, and he doesn't like the idea. He just does not want to do it. He's angry and he's upset. It says there in verse 11 that Naaman was wroth, or he was angry, and he went away and said, look, I thought he would at least come out and talk to me. This guy's a prophet. He's the one he's God's man, Yahweh, the Israeli God's man on the scene. And you would have thought somebody like me that he'd at least come out and talk to me. And he said, behold, I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God. See, he's never made that transition yet to that point, and strike his hand over the place and recover the leper. And then he goes on and he talks about in verse 12 there, and he says, I got my page mixed up. That's because I'm looking at my Bible in the wrong chapter. That's why. If I get back over here where I'm supposed to be, in verse 12 it says, are not Abana and Pharpar rivers of Nebraska? Nebraska, where'd that come from? We'll do something with that. The rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel, that I may not wash in them and be clean. So he turned and went away in a rage. He's just saying, no way, I'm not doing that. I don't care who tells me that I need to do that. And he said that those rivers, both those rivers, are better than all the waters of the Jordan River from top to bottom. And he said, may I not wash in them and be clean? And he turned and he went away in a rage. And he just says, I'm just not going to do that. And anyway, he went back to wherever his camp was at that time, and fuming and steaming and mad about this. And you can see that, but there's something about Naaman that makes him different than anybody else. His very name meant pleasantness, or a pleasant person. That he was not by nature a vicious, mean person. So, and he had the ability to think. And so there he is. He's in this situation, and this prophet has sent a message out to him and told him, okay, if you want to be healed, you go to the Jordan River and you dip in the river 7 times, which, by the way, in numerology and Bible study, that is the number of completion, that or perfectness, if we could call it that, in God's way. But that was the cure of this, what it was going to take to do this. But his servants came near him. And I thought about this, and I thought, how often somebody that's maybe superior or in a higher rank, how that they can be standoffish and they don't want to listen to anybody, no matter what kind of advice there is or where it's coming from. But in Naaman, you see here that he's willing to listen. And so it says here, and his servants came near and spoke unto him and said, my father, which in that culture that day, that was a term of respect. He said, if the prophet had bid thee to do some great things, wouldn't you have done it? How much more then when he said to thee, wash and be clean? And Naaman, to his credit, he took a little time to think on that. And he thought, this guy, I've come a long way to come to this man, to hear what he had to say. And maybe there's something there. Maybe there's something I ought to do with this. And it says, then he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God. And his flesh came again like unto the flesh of a little child, and he was clean, and he was healed of his leprosy. If you go on even down, it's past the lesson a little bit, but if you go on down into verse 15, and he says, and he returned to the man of God, he and all his company, and came and stood before him, and he said, behold, now I know that there is... Well, let's look at something right there just for a minute. We're about out of time, but he said, he returned to the man of God, or to the prophet, he and all his company, and came and stood before him. Now that he's got his mind right, and he's actually he's willing to understand that Yahweh is the God. Yahweh, the God of Israel, is the God, not a God, but he is the God. And he says, behold, now I know there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. Now therefore I pray thee, take a blessing of thy servant. And he wanted to give all this money and clothes and all this stuff to Elisha, but he would not take that. And then the rest of that is another story in itself. And so we're going to call that good here for today. We appreciate all the comments we get, and thank you all for listening in and putting up with us. And sorry about that little about Nebraska. I still don't know where that came from. But anyway, you guys come back and see us, and we thank you for listening.